I was 19 when I took the job at Sunrise Beach Resort. It was supposed to be the perfect summer gig. Good pay, free housing in the staff quarters, and all the beach time I could want during my days off. The resort sat right on Lake Michigan with a main lodge, several cabin clusters, and a long wooden pier that stretched out into the water. My job was simple enough. I worked the night shift at the front desk from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Most nights were quiet since the guests were either asleep or down at the beach bar that stayed open until 2. The pay was decent because nobody else wanted to work those hours, but I did not mind. I have always been a night person anyway. The staff housing was a converted motel about a quarter mile from the main resort. There were maybe 15 of us living there during peak season. Housekeepers, maintenance guys, a few other desk clerks, and kitchen staff. We all became pretty close since we were stuck together for 3 months. Everything was normal for the first few weeks. I would clock in at 11, handle the occasional late check-in or guest complaint, and spend most of my shift reading or watching movies on my laptop. The building was always quiet after midnight except for the air conditioning and the distant sound of waves. It was sometime in July when things started feeling off. I began noticing a car in the parking lot that would show up around 1 or 2 in the morning and just sit there with the engine running. Dark-colored sedan, maybe a Honda or Toyota. I could see it from the front desk windows, but could never make out the license plate or see who was inside because of the tinted windows. At first, I thought maybe it was someone picking up a guest or waiting for the bar to close. But it happened 3 nights in a row. Always the same car, always parked in the same spot near the edge of the lot where the lighting was poor. On the 4th night, I decided to walk outside and see what was going on. The moment I stepped out the front doors, the car pulled away. No headlights, just rolled out of the parking space and disappeared down the main road. I told myself it was probably nothing, but it bothered me enough that I mentioned it to my supervisor the next day. She said she would look into it, but nothing came of it. The car stopped showing up for about a week, and I forgot about it entirely. Then one night in early August, I was doing my usual rounds, checking that all the doors were locked and the pool area was clear. As I walked around the back of the building toward the service entrance, I saw a flash of light coming from the trees behind the resort. Just a quick burst, like someone taking a picture with a camera. I stopped and stared into the woods for a few minutes, but did not see anything else. The tree line was maybe 50 yards from the building, and it was pitch black back there. I convinced myself it was probably just a guest taking photos of the lake, or maybe someone camping illegally in the woods. But when I got back to the front desk, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were muddy footprints on the carpet leading from the back entrance to the hallway that connected to the guest room wings. Fresh prints, still wet. Someone had been inside the building while I was doing my rounds. I checked all the doors twice. Everything was still locked. I looked at the security footage, but our cameras only covered the front entrance and the pool area. Nothing showed anyone coming or going. I spent the rest of my shift jumping at every sound and checking over my shoulder constantly. The next night, I decided to stay inside and not do any rounds. I figured if someone was trying to get in while I was outside, I would just stay put. Around 2 a.m., I was sitting at the desk when I heard the unmistakable sound of the back door opening and closing. My heart started racing. I grabbed the phone to call the police, but then I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate steps coming toward the front desk. I crouched down behind the counter and tried to control my breathing. The footsteps stopped right in front of the desk. I could see shoes from under the counter. Work boots covered in mud. We sat there like that for what felt like forever. Me hiding, whoever it was, just standing there. Then I heard the camera sound again, that electronic shutter click. After a few more minutes, the footsteps retreated back down the hallway. I heard the back door open and close again. I waited another 20 minutes before I stood up and called my supervisor. She came in early and we looked around the building together. No signs of forced entry, nothing missing or disturbed. But when we checked the back door, we found it was unlocked, even though I knew I had locked it during my earlier rounds. She said she would change all the locks the next day and install additional cameras. I almost quit right then. The only reason I did not was because I needed the money, and there were only 3 weeks left in the season. I figured I could tough it out if they improved the security. The new locks were installed, and they added cameras covering the back entrance and the hallways. I felt a lot better knowing everything was being recorded. For a few nights, nothing happened, and I started to relax again. Then, on my second to last shift, I found an envelope slipped under the front door when I arrived at 11. My name was written on it in block letters. Inside was a single photograph. It was me, taken through the front desk window. I was sitting in my chair, reading a book, completely unaware I was being photographed. But what made it truly terrifying was the timestamp printed in the corner. It was from that night, taken just an hour before I found the envelope. Someone had been watching me, photographed me, developed or printed the picture, and delivered it all in the span of 60 minutes. I called the police immediately. They came out and took the photo as evidence, dusted for fingerprints, and took my statement. But there was not much they could do. No threats had been made. Technically, no crime had been committed except maybe trespassing. The officer suggested I not work alone for my last shift, so my supervisor stayed with me. We spent the whole night talking and drinking coffee, keeping all the lights on and checking the new camera feeds every few minutes. Nothing happened. I finished out my contract and left the next morning. Never heard anything more about it. But for months afterward, I would check my rearview mirror constantly and always felt like I was being watched. I still have no idea who was taking those pictures or what they wanted. Sometimes I wonder if they are still out there, watching some other night shift worker at some other job. The thought keeps me awake more than I would like to admit. The story I'm about to tell you happened 3 summers ago. I rarely speak about it because it still gives me nightmares. Here's what happened to me. It was a sweltering Thursday in late August. I had just turned 17, and my best friend Marcus had gotten his driver's license a week earlier. We were desperate to escape the heat and boredom of our small town in upstate New York. My parents were working late shifts at the hospital that week, so Marcus and I had the entire day to ourselves. We spent most of it playing video games in my basement, but by evening we were restless and wanted adventure. Marcus suggested we drive out to Crystal Lake. There were dozens of summer houses scattered around the shoreline, most of them owned by wealthy families from the city. During the week in late August, many of them sat empty as families returned home to prepare for the school year. We drove Marcus's beat-up Honda down the winding lake road as the sun began to set. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of pine trees. We were not planning anything malicious. We just wanted to walk along the shore and maybe skip some stones. As we parked near the boat launch, Marcus pointed to a large cabin about 100 yards down the beach. It was a beautiful 2-story house with huge windows facing the water. The deck was covered with expensive-looking outdoor furniture. The place looked completely deserted. No cars in the gravel driveway, no lights on inside. Even the dock was empty, with no boat tied to it. Marcus and I walked closer to get a better look. The house was even more impressive up close. It had to be worth at least $500,000. We both came from working-class families and had never seen anything like it. I suggested we should leave and find somewhere else to hang out. Marcus was not listening, though. He was staring at the back door that led from the deck into the house. He walked up the steps and tried the handle. To our amazement, the door opened easily. The owners had forgotten to lock it when they left. Marcus looked at me with excitement in his eyes. He said we should just take a quick look inside and leave. No one would ever know we were there. I knew it was wrong, but curiosity got the better of me. We stepped inside the house. It was beautifully furnished with leather couches and expensive artwork on the walls. The air conditioning was still running, making the house feel like a refrigerator compared to the heat outside. We agreed to stay for just 5 minutes. Marcus went upstairs to look around while I explored the main floor. The kitchen was enormous with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Everything was spotless and organized. I was admiring the view from the living room windows when I heard Marcus calling my name from upstairs. His voice sounded strange, almost worried. I climbed the wooden stairs and found him standing in the hallway. He pointed toward the master bedroom and whispered that he heard someone moving around in there. At first, I thought he was trying to scare me as a prank, but his face was completely serious. We both stood perfectly still and listened. There was definitely someone walking around in that room. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the hardwood floor. My heart started racing. I assumed it was the homeowner who had come back early and caught us trespassing. We were in serious trouble. I whispered to Marcus that we needed to leave immediately through the back door. But as we started walking toward the stairs, the bedroom door opened. A man stepped out into the hallway. He was tall and thin with long, greasy hair. He was wearing dirty clothes and had a wild look in his eyes. Most disturbing of all, he was holding a kitchen knife. This was not the homeowner. This was a complete stranger who had no business being in this house either. The man stared at us for what felt like an eternity. Then he smiled and started walking toward us. He moved slowly, like he was savoring the moment. Marcus and I ran. We sprinted down the stairs and through the living room toward the back door. I could hear the man's footsteps pounding on the floor behind us. We burst through the door and onto the deck. Without thinking, I jumped over the railing and landed hard on the rocky beach below. Pain shot through my left wrist as I hit the ground. Marcus landed beside me a second later. We scrambled to our feet and ran toward his car as fast as we could. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the man chasing us, but he never appeared. We drove straight to the police station and reported what happened. The officers took our statements and asked us detailed questions about the man we encountered. 2 days later, Detective Rodriguez called my house. She told me they had searched the lake house and found evidence that someone had been living there for several weeks. The man had broken in through a basement window and had been hiding in the house whenever the owners visited on weekends. The detective said they were still searching for him. She warned me to be careful and to call immediately if I saw anyone matching his description. That was 3 years ago. They never caught the man. Every time I drive past Crystal Lake, I wonder if he's still out there, waiting in another empty house. My boyfriend Marcus and I had been planning this getaway for months. We found a rental cabin on Lake George through a vacation website, and the photos looked perfect. 3 days of pure relaxation away from the city, just the two of us, and nothing but water and trees for miles. The cabin sat right on the water with a private dock and a screened-in porch that faced the lake. Dense pine forests surrounded the property on 3 sides, making it feel completely cut off from civilization. The nearest neighbor was supposedly 2 miles down the dirt road that led to the main highway. We arrived Friday afternoon in early July. The heat was suffocating, but the lake breeze made it bearable. Marcus immediately wanted to test out the kayaks that came with the rental, while I unpacked our things. The cabin was rustic but clean, with knotty pine walls and furniture that looked like it came from the 1980s. That first day, we spent hours on the water, paddling around the small coves and swimming in the surprisingly cold lake. The water was so clear, you could see the rocky bottom even in the deeper sections. We grilled burgers on the deck that evening and watched the sunset paint the water orange and pink. It felt like paradise. The second day started the same way. We took the kayaks out again after breakfast and found a secluded spot on the far shore where we could swim without any clothes on. The freedom was intoxicating. We spent most of the morning there before paddling back for lunch. That afternoon, while Marcus napped on the porch, I decided to take a solo walk along the shoreline. The path was narrow and overgrown in places, clearly not used very often. About a quarter mile from the cabin, I noticed fresh footprints in the mud near the water's edge. They were larger than mine or Marcus's, and they seemed to follow the same route I was taking. I told myself they could be from anyone. Maybe the property owner checking on things or another renter from weeks ago. But something about seeing them there, so close to our supposedly private retreat, made me uneasy. When I got back to the cabin, Marcus was awake and reading on the porch. I mentioned the footprints casually, not wanting to sound paranoid. He shrugged it off and suggested we start preparing dinner. We had bought steaks in town and planned to grill them as the sun went down. We ate outside on the deck, citronella candles flickering around us to keep the mosquitoes away. The lake was perfectly still, like black glass reflecting the first stars. Marcus was telling me about his plans to ask for a promotion when he got back to work, and I was only half listening because I kept hearing small sounds from the forest behind us. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling when there was no wind. Each time I looked over my shoulder, I saw nothing but dark trees. Around 10 o'clock, we decided to go inside and watch something on the laptop we had brought. The cabin had no television, which was supposed to be part of its charm. We settled onto the old couch with a bottle of wine and started streaming a comedy. Halfway through the movie, all the lights went out. The laptop screen provided the only illumination, casting strange shadows on the walls. Marcus got up to check the breaker box, which we eventually found in a utility closet near the kitchen. He flipped a few switches, but nothing happened. Probably just a blown fuse or something, he said. We can call the owner in the morning. We finished the movie by laptop light and headed to bed around midnight. The bedroom was on the second floor, with windows facing both the lake and the forest. Without any artificial light, the darkness outside was complete. I was almost asleep when I heard the dock creaking. At first I thought it might be the wind, but there was no wind that night. The lake had been perfectly calm all evening. The creaking had a rhythm to it, like someone walking slowly across the wooden planks. I nudged Marcus awake and whispered for him to listen. We both lay there in silence, straining to hear. The creaking stopped. Then we heard the screen door to the porch open and close. Marcus grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight. "Stay here," he whispered, but I was already getting out of bed. There was no way I was staying alone in that room. We crept downstairs together, Marcus leading with the phone light. The living room looked normal. The porch was empty. Marcus checked the front door and found it still locked with the deadbolt engaged. "Maybe it was just the wind after all," he said, but his voice was shaky. We went back upstairs, but neither of us could fall asleep. Every small sound made us both tense up. Around 3 in the morning, I must have finally drifted off because I woke up to Marcus shaking my shoulder. "There's someone outside," he whispered. I could hear it too. Footsteps circling the cabin. Slow, deliberate steps on the gravel driveway. Then on the wooden deck, then back to gravel. Over and over, like someone was pacing around the entire building. Marcus grabbed a baseball bat from the closet. We had brought it for protection, though at the time it seemed like overkill for a peaceful lake vacation. The footsteps stopped directly below our bedroom window. Then we heard scratching. Long, deliberate scrapes against the cabin's exterior wall, like fingernails on wood. I wanted to call the police, but my phone had no signal. Marcus tried his with the same result. The isolation that had seemed so appealing now felt like a trap. The scratching moved around to the other side of the cabin, then silence. We waited in the darkness for what felt like hours, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. Just as I was starting to think whoever it was had given up and left, we heard the front door handle rattle. Then came the knocking. Slow, rhythmic knocks that seemed to echo through the entire cabin. "Hello?" a voice called from outside. "I know you're in there. I just want to talk." The voice was male, calm, almost friendly, but something about it made my skin crawl. Marcus motioned for me to stay quiet. We both knew that responding would only confirm we were inside. The knocking got louder, more insistent. Then, we heard the person walking around to the back of the cabin, testing the porch door. The scraping started again, this time on the back wall. "I've been watching you," the voice called out, closer now, probably right outside the kitchen. Swimming in my lake, using my dock, this is my place. Marcus held up his phone and showed me he had managed to get 1 bar of signal. He was already dialing 911. The conversation with the dispatcher was whispered and urgent. Our location, the situation, the fact that someone was trying to get inside. She told us to stay on the line and that officers were on their way, but it would take at least 20 minutes to reach us. 20 minutes felt like a lifetime. The scratching and knocking continued, sometimes at the front of the cabin, sometimes at the back. The person seemed to be taking their time, not in any hurry to actually break in, like they were enjoying our fear. Then everything went quiet. We waited in that silence for 10 minutes before we heard the police sirens in the distance, getting closer. When the officers finally arrived, they found the front door standing wide open and muddy footprints on the porch and throughout the downstairs. They searched the surrounding woods with flashlights but found no one. They took our statement and said they would increase patrols in the area, but advised us to consider leaving early. We packed our things at first light and drove straight home. On the way, Marcus called the rental company to report what had happened. The person on the phone seemed genuinely surprised and concerned, but then said something that made my blood run cold. "That's strange," she said. "We've had 3 other reports of similar incidents at that property in the past 2 months. We were actually planning to take it off the rental market." We never found out who had been outside the cabin that night, or why they claimed the lake as their own. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed in our apartment back in the city, I still think I can hear that slow, deliberate scratching against the walls.